This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the last day of June, 30th June 2021, and I am Miss Kay.
And I am JM. In case you missed the headlines this morning, here they are. In the Daily Nation, the BBI fight back. In the Standard, Uhuru Raila 9-point BBI. And in the Star, Ruto guards kicked out of Kenyatta team.
Whoa.
Yes. Would you like to kick us off to about this story in the Star?
Absolutely. Now, last year, just about when COVID struck, William Ruto addressed the nation from Government House in Karen. He was asked by the media why he wasn't at State House when the president was addressing the nation on COVID. Ruto responded by saying, "Oh, you know, the president and his deputy cannot travel in the same equipment at any one time." What Ruto was saying without saying is that he had contemplated a situation where he was the designated survivor. He was telling country that he should there be a scenario where the head of state ceases to exist, he is next in line. This, in my view, was distasteful, but not just distasteful, but indicative of where his mind was. And for you to know where his mind could have been, please go read the story of how Blaise Compaoré and Mobutu Sese Seko got to power. But that's not all. Last year, police arrested 2 presidential escort guards at the house of then fugitive Oscar Sudi. Question is, what were they doing at the home of someone who had a record of insulting the first family? What were the guards entrusted with the security of the president, the head of state, doing at the home of a man who has threatened the president publicly? What's our point here? William Ruto should be watched carefully. He must have thought of every conceivable way he could get power, including not waiting for 2022. And by the way, should he get power today or tomorrow, we hypothesize William Ruto wouldn't just go after his enemies. The man will serve for 10 plus years.
Some interesting thoughts there. Well, I'll go back to the first 2 headlines. Today, the BBI legal battle inspired me to think about power, specifically the separation of powers with regard to the 3 arms of government. The term separation of powers appears nowhere in our constitution. However, our government is divided into 3 distinct but interdependent branches. Although these divisions were designed to promote both liberty and efficiency, this structure affords ample opportunity for inter-branch conflict. And Alexis de Tocqueville observed, and this was about America, but I think that it is also relevant to Kenya today, that scarcely any political question arises in the United States that is not resolved sooner or later into a judicial question. So because it appears that separation of powers disputes are beginning to occupy a central place in the court's docket, I think that the court should articulate a consistent methodology for analyzing separation of powers disputes between the 3 branches of government, themselves included. Why do I say this? The likelihood of the courts to swing between strict and liberal decisions will at best generate controversy and at worst provoke constitutional and political crisis. The quest for ultimate judicial resolution of constitutional turf battles between the arms of government may have undesirable consequences for us as a nation. This is because separation of powers disputes have implications on fundamental questions about government, questions that rarely receive detailed attention in judicial opinions. And excessive reliance upon the courts deceives us into thinking that disputes are purely constitutional in nature and that only judges can resolve them. So demanding judicial resolution improperly diminishes the role of the political branches in interpreting and applying the Constitution. Remember, there are 3 branches, not 1 branch. And the Constitution derives its meaning not only from judicial interpretation, but also from shared understandings that emerge from governance and politics. To quote one legal scholar, the Constitution is more than just what the judges say it is.
Yes.
Interesting there. So, it's been a while since we had a corruption-related headline. And you know why? Because, as President Uhuru Kenyatta said 2 weeks ago while speaking to Ukambani leaders, he has gotten room to govern, not to politic. And here's the clip.
I have done much more than I was able to do even in my first term. Why? Because I have been able to focus myself working in conjunction with my colleagues, and being able to focus on the development agenda, not the political agenda.
What the president really meant was that he finally managed to rid himself of his conniving deputy and his corrupt ways.
Woo.
I would like to hypothesize that there is a correlation. And
Yes.
No. In fact, there's a direct causation
Yes.
between lower incidences of corruption in Uhuru's second term and Ruto being sidelined from government. We can confirm that Ruto was the magnet for all corruption in government. With Ruto in government, there was an acute crisis in administration as far as corruption is concerned.
Yes.
And that is because Ruto insisted to Uhuru, when they were constituting government in 2013, that government has to be run by politicians rather than bureaucrats, which is dead wrong. As an expert in public management, I can tell you this. The state ought to be led by a strong, empowered team of permanent secretaries.
Yes.
And this is where Ruto deviated. Ruto insisted on their coalition agreement with Uhuru that the government should be led by strong politicians and weak bureaucrats. And why did he do that? So that he could manipulate the system.
Oh my God.
When Ruto got into office, his game of primary thrust was to break down, to completely dismantle the system that Mzee Kibaki had put in place to keep politicians in check. You see, Kibaki, having served as a long-time civil servant and politician, he knew the dark and devious hearts of his colleagues, of his politicians. And he knew that people like Ruto had the tendency to stick their hands in a cookie jar. So, what he did throughout his presidency was to appoint a very strong league of permanent secretaries.
Yes.
Formidable,
Yes.
loyal
Yes.
PSs with mean faces.
Absolutely.
Who would put their foot down and say no to a minister,
Yes.
say no to the deputy president,
Yes.
and if necessary, even say no to the president himself
Yes.
for the interests of the country.
Absolutely.
You know, the public doesn't even know this, but even Mzee Kibaki himself was vetoed many times by his head of civil service,
Yes.
Ambassador Mudaura.
Yes.
And that is the model Uhuru wanted to implement in term one. A model that keeps politicians at bay, that keeps them accountable, keeps them in check.
Yes.
You know, a bureaucracy that intimidates politicians.
Yes.
But because of William Ruto's sins of restlessness, of greed, and so on, during term one, we had a bureaucracy of pushovers.
Yes.
But now, without Ruto, as you can see, we have a powerful bureaucracy.
Yes.
It even includes Jeshi.
Yes.
And their independence and their confidence has been restored. And this bureaucracy, we call the Kenyan Civil Service, it's delivering for Kenyans on behalf of His Excellency, the President. So now we've located the problem.
Yes.
Our next task is to make him the object of aggression for the next election.
Chapa kabisa.
To understand object of aggression, see yesterday's episode.
Absolutely. Now, we've got a three-part criteria that we use to assess the headlines.
Yeah.
Topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and thoughtful or just plain lazy. Do you have any opinions, strong opinions about the headlines?
The star.
The Star. Ruto guards kicked out of Kenyatta team.
Okay, fine, I'll take it.
Yeah, they should
Fantastic. So the Star gives us our winning headline. And now, on to our final thought. But before we get there, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So what is our final thought?
And now, our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Rewire: Digital Cosmopolitans in the Age of Connection by Ethan Zuckerman.
Our theme and final thought this week is data, the internet, and the future. In today's book, Ethan Zuckerman presents several examples of how our increasingly connected world can be both beneficial and detrimental. Zuckerman provides a bracing analysis suggesting that the internet, instead of making news more readily available around the world, could in fact be choking it off. He says, and I quote, "A central paradox of this connected age is that while it is easier than ever to share information and perspectives from different parts of the world, we may now encounter a narrower picture of the world than in less connected days. Today, TV news in the United States has less than half the number of minutes devoted to international reporting than it did in the 1970s. The author cites one estimate that foreign news has gone from 45% of TV newscasts in the 70s to less than 10% today. Clearly, just because there is technology that allows cross-cultural information sharing doesn't mean it happens. So the author looks at the way we get our news, and what he finds is not encouraging. The world of personalization and customization results in us only seeing news our friends think is important or news that publishers believe we will be interested in. He gives an example that Americans may not learn about what is happening in Zambia unless they happen to know some Zambians. And in the age of Google and Facebook, if our media consumption are limited, if our habits of media consumption are limited, we are to blame, not some all-powerful gatekeepers, since media is, after all, curated. But what can we do to get exposure to what we need to know as opposed to what we want to know? The author suggests monitoring your media consumption so you can better understand your prejudices and overcome them to get a wider picture of the world.
Love it. Now, I love the chapter on the changing face of the CEO. And the lesson I got here is, should you ever serve in high office in a foreign country, keep antagonistic tendencies at a minimum, lest you become an international fugitive. And herein, I want to tell you a story of a man known as Carlos Ghassan. Ghassan was born in Brazil of Lebanese parents and educated in Paris. He was working for Renault when the company took a major stake in Nissan in 1999. The Japanese auto manufacturer was deep in debt and making money on only 3 of its 48 models. So Renault asked Ghassan to become CEO of Nissan in 2001, and he accepted, promising to return it to profitability in a single year. Ghassan's methods were unconventional. His methods were brutal. His first months as Nissan's CEO, he shut down plants, fired 14% of Nissan's workforce, got rid of the Kiretsu supply logistics system, which virtually every Japanese car maker relied on, and switched Nissan's working language from Japanese to English. Within a year, Nissan had returned from the abyss and made a profit over 2 billion sterling pounds, or roughly about $4 billion thereabouts. But Ghassan would pay for his assault and contempt of Japanese working culture. In November 2018, Ghassan was sacked by Nissan over allegations of financial impropriety. Soon after, Japanese authorities charged him with underreporting $80 million of his personal income, and later of breach of trust and misappropriation of Nissan funds. He got charged in court and put under house arrest. Some years later, a plan to free him was hatched and they moved him to Lebanon. The brains behind the plan was a former US Special Forces soldier called Mike Taylor. This man hired a private jet, flew to Japan, went to Ghassan's hotel, picked him up, put him in a box disguised as a woofer box, the one that carries music equipment, smuggled him into the private jet and delivered him to his family in Beirut, all in under 30 hours. One of the most daring operations of our time. The Japanese were livid. Ghassan was received by Lebanon's president and is now a national hero in Lebanon, but Japan still wants him. In fact, Ghassan has an international fugitive alert put out by Interpol. In short, the man will forever stay where he knows he'll get protection from extradition, and that's Lebanon.
What a fascinating story.
It's really
beautiful.
interesting.
Yeah, a really, really great story there.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about the concluding aspects of this book. And in the concluding chapter, the author says that the connected shall inherit the earth. And here he's basically giving lessons in history on how countries in the past that are today's richest countries made sure that they remained connected. 3 types of connection, therefore, historically. One is physical connection. And a case in point that the author gives here is Singapore. 2 key factors in Singapore's success were the construction of a major container port and an international airport with affordable landing rights. And the author tells us that nations that have built an infrastructure that allows connection through travel and trade also tend to be connected to the flow of people and ideas. For the most disconnected nations, especially our developing countries, for example, here in Africa. Strategies for connection begin with the basics of infrastructure.
Correct.
Roads,
Yeah.
railroads,
Yes.
ports and airports, telephone and power lines, and internet cables, which is what President Uhuru Kenyatta has been doing over the last 8 years, following this formula. Number 2, immigration. Right? Highly connected nations are starting to see themselves as market states, competing with other destinations for highly skilled immigrants. Cases in point today: Middle East, Canada, Australia. And in response, these countries formulate immigration policies which are geared towards a highly mobile global workforce, creating more provisions for guest workers and workable paths towards citizenship for those who want it, and so on and so forth. Just increasing the diversity within the country in terms of the population, but then also recruiting the best minds and the best talent from all over the world. And then finally, education, another way to remain connected. Connected states, he says, typically invest heavily in education, preparing students to encounter a wide and complex world, both abroad and at home. And a case in point here are the efforts to build world-class universities in the Middle East, which reflects not just aspirations of theirs to be recognized as centers of learning, but also to be recognized as centers of wealth, to wish to prepare citizens for their roles as international, citizens. And this is how countries out there in the West, global North particularly, remain connected and remain ahead of other countries. As I said, the US is a great example, Silicon Valley, for example, the UK as well, and now the Middle East is just emerging, Australia, Canada, and even with Kenya.
Oh yeah.
I think with our Konza city,
Oh yeah.
this is something that we are aspiring for.
Yes.
As well. Right, so today we had a winning headline from the Star, and I'd like to leave you with a quote by George Bernard Shaw that reminds me of Uhuru Kenyatta's methodology. The reasonable man adapts himself to the conditions that surround him, but the unreasonable man adapts the surrounding conditions to himself.
Yes.
Now, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Be unreasonable always. Have a good evening, and don't forget to subscribe.